Right, welcome back. Let's continue with more news. The Road Accident Fund CEO, Letsoalo, says the fund needs to be sustainable to function, and therefore, in its path to sustainability, it is working on amending the Road Accident Fund bill.
Then, Regulation 8 says the following. Subject to the provisions of this regulation, any benefit option that is offered by medical schemes must is peremptory, right? Pay in full without co-payments or use of deductibles the diagnosis, treatment and care cost of the prescribed minimum benefit conditions. Now, we now put paid to the fact that there was no any provision in law that allowed medical aids to come and claim this money back. They must show you. They must show you. And they can't go and abuse their members and tell them that, no, this thing is going to increase your medical aid subscriptions, because this has been accounted for. In fact, Discovery in 2014 told people that they treat accident victims, road accident victims, or the injuries and the claim like any other injury. That's what they said. What has changed, we don't know. But the reality is this: South Africans must be disabused from this concept of RAB being recalcitrant, saying things. Everything we say is backed by the law. Let them show you what is in the law.
Right, so to talk more about the proposed amendment, we're going to be joined via Teams by Dr Aslam Dasoo, the convener for Progressive Health Forum. Dr Dasoo, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Perhaps you could help us understand what the proposed changes to the Road Accident Fund in South Africa is going to look like, and ultimately the implications thereof.
Well, I think Mr. Letsoalo, the CEO, just explained what the primary purpose of this amendment is. I regret to say Mr. Letsoalo is highly misinformed about the legal position on this. In fact, the courts have already ruled, both the High Court and the Supreme Court, against the Road Accident Fund, refusing to reimburse medical schemes. They have now taken it to the Constitutional Court simply because they can. And so I don't believe that they are on any legal footing of any solidity in this whole thing. One has to understand that the Road Accident Fund, and everyone knows about it, it's an institution of state and what it does. And what they may not understand is that it is a deep liability for the state. When I served on its board up to 2010, it was clear then already, when it had a contingent liability, that means unpaid claims, up to 60 billion rand. Today, it's over 360 billion rand. That means an unfunded liability that sits on the balance sheet of the state. And that's about the same size as Eskom's debt. And this organization is such an anachronism in the whole world. I think there are probably only 2 or 3 countries, including South Africa, that has it. There's no logical reason for the existence of this fund. Even back then, we told Parliament when they were amending it to a no-fault scheme that this is actually a recipe for failure. It will accelerate the contingent liabilities. It gets funded through the diesel rebate, and I think it's now about 15 billion rand a year, and they just managed to pay out that amount. So they're unable to bring down the liability that's sitting on their books. And in fact, it's growing. The entire infrastructure is designed to clog up the courts on these road accident fund claims. It is an albatross around the neck of the economy, and the best thing the government can do is to ring fence it, slowly lower its liability over several years, and change it into a social benefit scheme, part of the social security system. And I'll give you one reason why that is a good idea. A fractured pelvis that you may sustain from a motor vehicle accident is no different to a fractured pelvis you may sustain by falling off a ladder. The medical condition is the same, the input is the same, and there's no reason to have a separate fund. We know that it pays out benefits for people who lose the ability to work or have permanent disability. But in the social security system, that is easily managed. And in fact, road accident liability can be managed by third-party insurance. You may not remember, you may have been too young, but there used to be on every vehicle a disc that you paid for every year that protected you from catastrophic costs should you be in an accident, you and your passengers, as well as the opposite party. We should give it back to the private sector to run and take it off the burden of the state, because it actually doesn't help anyone at this stage.
Dr. Aslam, thank you for that context, because we were also questioning the timing of these proposed changes and really the motive behind it. Who is it really helping? How would you weigh in on that?
Right, and I think this comes to the point of the amendment, actually. So what we found with the Road Accident Fund is that it is legislation for deterioration. So as its burden increases, it runs to the legislature to amend the act so it has to pay less. So they did away with, I think it was for, special payments for extraordinary loss of income and so on. And they did the one amendment. And now they want an amendment that's putting the burden onto medical schemes. Now, medical schemes, yes, it is a prescribed minimum benefit that the medical scheme must immediately pay and in full for any injury sustained during a motor vehicle accident. But the member of the medical scheme pays from their after-tax income to the medical scheme. It's a discretionary payment. It doesn't make them lose the right to access the Road Accident Fund, which is funded by the fuel levy, which everyone pays for. So I'm surprised that Mr. Letsoalo's confidence about this whole thing. In fact, it's inappropriate. This is not a good amendment. It must not pass. And the Road Accident Fund needs to be shut down and stop being a liability on the state. If you think about it, 360 billion rand, right? And they get in about 15 billion rand a year. So that's the liability. This is their income. The income comes from a diesel rebate. So farmers who are not on the road using tractors which use diesel also pay this levy. And in the petrol price for every litre, it's a significant amount. So the reason you're paying such high prices at the pump is not just because of the rand-dollar exchange rate deterioration, it's because of the increase year on year for the Road Accident Fund levy to fund this giant operation that simply clogs up the courts because their default position is not to pay. And lawyers are the only parties making any money out of this. It's inappropriate. It's a dead man walking, as we told Parliament as the board of the Road Accident Fund back in 2010. But of course, nothing has happened. And there's lots of vested interests that will prevent it from happening.
So Dr. Aslam, in your opinion, now that it's open for public comment, where to from here? What do you propose then?
I think, well, a sensible government would withdraw this amendment. That's the first thing. Because they know exactly what I'm saying, and they know this is a burden on them. So take the easy way out, just withdraw it, and tell Mr. Letsoalo to fix up his organization as best he can while we shut it down. Number two, I think there must be a huge public outcry. I think it's so inefficient. People wait for years to get paid. Yeah. Give it to the private sector. Third-party liability insurance is very efficient. The insurance companies know how to manage it. Let them do it. Number three, they must look at the social security system in South Africa. We have the grant system. And if someone is permanently injured, they can be on a social grant to manage them. They can have medical expenses covered. They can have some income support if they can't work. It's very easy to do. Now, the only reason it's not happening is because of the vested interest, I must say. And that's both within the organization and the external, mainly the legal fraternity that depends on their income from the Road Accident Fund cases.
Dr. Aslam, just in conclusion, I was just reading some of the amendments or the proposed amendments. I mean, there's what comes to the fore. There's likely to be a jump in medical aid premiums as the industry is forced to mitigate the risk of members not being covered. There's obviously also proposed amendment to banning of compensation for any person who's not a South African citizen or a permanent resident. What concerns or red flags emerge from some of those propositions?
Two, both the propositions put up red flags. The first is that, look, I don't think it's a major cost to medical schemes. I think it'll probably account for about 2% of medical scheme expenditure. But that 2% will have to be offset because medical schemes are creatures of statute. They're mutual funds. They're owned by their members. They're non-profit, and they must maintain a minimum reserve of 25%. So if the payout, the additional payout now from this bill would reduce that, they would have to increase your premiums to cover that by law. So it will be a definite knock-on. So that's the first red flag. And I think the second red flag was on the second point you raised. Please just remind me, you raised two issues.
I was speaking about the other amendment which looked at a lack of cover for non-South African citizens or permanent residents as well.
Yes, sorry. This is in keeping with the trend we're seeing across the board. Even this NHI proposal that they put forward, they call it coverage because that implies there will be those without cover. Okay, so universal coverage you will have, but you will have to be a South African citizen, which means all immigrants will no longer be able to access health services. The same thing here. So this government has decided that the foreign nationals are a huge burden, but it is an electoral ploy, because a lot of parties are electioneering on that. It is completely against the spirit of the Constitution to discriminate against foreign nationals in this way. In the health sector, once the patient arrives, documented or undocumented, ethical rules for doctors means they have to treat them. We don't have discretion on this. And their laws, these laws, won't be able to give us a discretion on it either because it'll be unconstitutional. We can expect this to be a huge electoral issue, but this bill is also channeling that really right-wing agenda now to exclude foreign nationals. And again, I'm quite convinced that the governors of the Road Accident Fund must understand that we all know this. They can't pull the wool over our eyes any longer. They must shut this thing down, reduce the petrol price. We have a deep economic crisis. We can't be carrying this albatross around our necks as well.
Dr. Aslam, thank you for your time with us on the SABC. For those sentiments, Dr. Aslam Dasoo, convener for Progressive Health Forum, weighing in on the matter regarding the Road Accident Fund Amendment Bill, which now has opened for public comment. We're just looking at what the terms and conditions are going to look like and the implications there for the future. Again, thank you to him for those sentiments at this hour.